So you finally reached your nursing classes. You're in Patho and Foundations, studying what you want to study, and wow, it can be overwhelming. So this is the first of 3 videos focused on doing well and managing your first nursing classes. This particular video will focus on study strategies. The second one on test-taking strategies, and then the third one will have some tips to help manage that stress and test anxiety. Particularly this video focuses on how to organize and attack the content for your nursing classes and specifically for Patho. So first of all, what are some of the common strategies that people use that I find just don't work too well? The first one would be to try to memorize everything. And this has probably worked well for you in some classes before, which is why you're trying to do it now. It's not a bad strategy if you have a limited amount of information. But if you have a lot of information that's coming quickly, this just simply won't work. One of the other strategies people use is just to focus on getting the main ideas. This is not a problem as a starting point. It just usually they give up before they understand it at the level that they really need to. They think they know it better than they really do. The third strategy that I commonly hear as people work their way through the first couple of tests is you have to give yourself more time. And often people wait too long to really start studying. Now, if you start employing some of the strategies that I'm going to talk about, you'll find that as you move through the material, you're better organized. So as you come to those last 3 or 4 or 5 days, you're not just starting to get organized there, but you're really doing some good, effective studying. So what happens when you use these strategies? Here's some of the common problems that I see. If you really focus on trying to memorize everything, you will become overwhelmed. There is just too much information for your brain to effectively store and to make easily accessible for you when it comes to the test. The second problem is you go into the test feeling like you're familiar with all of the topics and hoping that when you see the question, you'll be able to remember what was important there, or you'll be able to use the clues in the question to pick out which one of these is the right answer. Oftentimes, as you may have experienced, you get there and all of the terms look familiar. All of this leads to just increased stress during the test. As the test goes on, your thoughts may become more negative, more pessimistic. You may start to feel some panic rising. You start hurrying through the questions. You struggle to understand what the question is asking. All of these are going to interfere with just some good test-taking strategies, good problem solving. So how do we go about learning? Well, it's really a continuum, and I'm going to talk about it as kind of 2 different strategies, but they're really 2 different ends of the continuum. And the first one is this bottom-up learning. And people, and I would say 75% of students probably fall more in this category or this end of the continuum, and that is they prefer to start with all of the basic concepts, the details, and build from there. In truth, a lot of your classes up to this point have kind of taught the material that way. They start with the basic building blocks. This is an okay, in fact, it's a very powerful way of learning, but it's very slow. And what ends up happening is you get most of the way through the material, but not all of the way. You run out of time. Oftentimes I hear students say, if I had a couple of more days, I could really put it together. The problem is you don't have a couple of more days. So this strategy tends not to work well. This strategy is also good for knowledge-based questions, where you basically just have to say, what is this? It is not, however, good for application, comprehension, critical thinking, problem-solving questions where you actually work with the knowledge rather than just recall it. So what does the other end of the continuum look like? What's our other option? Well, it's what we typically talk about as a top-down, conceptual, or big picture approach. And in this strategy, we start by identifying what are the main ideas and how are they related. So let me give you an example outside of nursing from a class that I used to teach in the exercise science program. It was the psychology and sociology of sport. And I would have them bring their books to the first class period. And I would start by saying, we're going to take 10 minutes, and I want you to read through chapter 1, and then we're going to talk about it. Now, in truth, chapter 1 is like 35 pages long. So they're not going to be able to read it. But I just tell them, you got 10 minutes, go. Some people will just start reading. Even though they know it's not going to work, that's what they do. When the 10 minutes is over, I say, okay, for those of you who were reading, what's chapter 1 about? And it's the history of sport in Western culture. And they'll say, well, it begins with the ancient Greek and the Roman, and that they used sport as a part of military training and fitness and leadership and all of these things. Great. What's the rest of the chapter about? Well, they have no idea. So we move on to the second group, which is really most of the class. And I say, what's chapter 1 about? And they start pulling random information from the chapter. Things about festivals. They'll talk about companies that used to own professional teams, or that trains and riverboats were an important part, and when lights became a part of the sport world. All of these things are true, but they're just random information. So finally I'll ask, but how is this chapter organized? And only a few people in the class will be able to say, oh, this chapter has 4 sections: ancient, colonial America, the Industrial Revolution, and the commercial era. Now, as soon as they say that middle group that had a lot of random information all of a sudden says, oh, yeah, the festivals and all of those things during the Industrial Revolution, and now what's a part of our current commercial era, yeah, all of these things make sense. So this reflects that top-down main idea approach. But obviously, just having the main ideas isn't good enough. So we need to add details for each of these main ideas based on lecture notes, PowerPoint slides, objectives, your text. Wherever you're gathering that information from needs to fill out these main ideas. Now, as I said before, the danger of this strategy by itself is that you will think you know it better than you really do, at least to begin with. So what do? If neither end of the continuum is best, then we really want and need to draw strategies, the best of both approaches. We need ways of organizing this material that keeps the main ideas clearly before us and helps us organize the details. So what's our strategy? How do we actually do this? Well, one of the answers, the best one I've found, is to use these concept maps. And for concept maps, what we're really doing is, like the example I just said, we're trying to identify and organize the main ideas. And then we identify for Patho the primary diseases or process that's associated with each one of these main ideas. Okay, so now let's talk about it related to what you're studying right now. So I want you to think about renal. How is renal organized? What comes to mind? Think about it. When I went through the PowerPoint slides, I found that the diseases in renal are organized into 6 different areas. Let me give you an example. The first one is urinary tract obstructions. How many of the other 5 can you identify? All right, so here's the ones that I found. So when I looked through the slides, I find a section on urinary tract obstructions, tumors, infections, and so forth. Now, when I've showed this to students, they usually cock their heads sideways and look at it and say, Wow, it seems a lot more complicated than that. And it certainly is if we're trying to organize it at the detail level. But if we get our head above the trees and we say, what are the main ideas? Then this is what we find. Clearly, however, this is not enough information. This is a starting point, not an ending point. So, what do you put under each one of these? All right, I'm going to give our little guy a rest. I'm going to show you what I created when I mapped this out onto paper for myself. So I took each one of these and went through the slides and thought, okay, so what goes under the obstructions? And I found that there's a section for upper obstructions and lower obstructions. And each of those has a couple of different diseases, and then a couple of things for tumors, for the UTIs, and so forth. Now you'll also notice highlighted right under each category are the objectives that go with each one. So when you look at, say, the upper obstructions, a very important logical question is, okay, so this is nice. This helps me really simplify and organize it, but what do I need to know about each one of these? Well, look at the objective. What does it tell you is important for this area? Go back and look at the PowerPoint slides. What notes did you add to that? What was emphasized? That's kind of that detail level. Now, do not put the details on this page, and you probably don't need to write a lot of the details out. You might have those. Now, some people like to go through and answer and write out or type out answers to all of the objectives. If that's a strategy that works for you, great. What's important is that this gives you a concrete strategy to get the main ideas identified and then the specific diseases under each one of those, and finally, how to add those details. Which details are important? Well, that's a part of your own learning process, and different faculty emphasize different things. This at least gets you organized and helps you think through the content. Okay, so that's an overview of the study strategy. Now, everybody personalizes this a bit to fit their own style. But the truth is, these are the same principles that I use with juniors and with seniors getting ready for their NCLEX. We just add a little bit more complexity. We need to be able to think through the material at both a big picture level and a more specific level. This also carries over then into the test-taking strategies, which will be the focus of the next one. But using this template idea, if it asks about an upper obstruction, because you've organized it that way, anything that you know is a lower obstruction can't be the right answer. Anything that fits in one of these other categories, you can easily dismiss. So again, this is just a simple way of helping you organize and work through the material. So let's review. Give yourself time to study well. You will not be able to learn all the material you need to do if you wait until the last minute. But I would really recommend you get the big picture, at least those main ideas, before you go to class. That helps you organize your learning. If you can put those diseases in so you have that fuller concept map before class, even better. After class, preferably within the same day, or at least within 24 hours, review the material. This helps you organize mentally those main ideas and the diseases, disorders. If you find there are areas that you did not understand well, mark those so that when you come back to it later, that tells you you need to go to the text, you need to talk to some of your peers, you're going to need to refresh that. But you've at least kind of pre-learned, been in class, and then reviewed it right away. When it comes to Sunday or Monday morning, we really need to move away from just looking over your notes, what we would call visual recall, to memory recall. This is the process of quizzing yourself or quizzing somebody else. You can use your concept map. You can visually work your way through. What are the main categories? What fits in each one of those categories? Now, what causes that? What are the primary manifestations? How will I tell these things apart? This gives you that mental strategy of working through the content, which is what you're going to need when you actually start attacking the test questions. So, the next video that I'm going to be posting will actually walk through how to attack the most common multiple choice, applied multiple choice kind of formats. What should we be looking at? What should we be thinking about? Keep working hard, and I'll talk to you later.